Emilia Clarke stepped through the grand bronze doors of the embassy, her heart fluttering with a mix of nerves and determination. The gala inside was unlike anywhere she had been before. A sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos swirled beneath golden chandeliers that cast warm, opulent light over the marble floors. The scent of delicate white orchids mingled with polished wood and expensive perfumes, wrapping the room in layers of refinement. She wore a simple, faded dress she had picked up from a thrift shop, slightly oversized and threadbare at the seams. Her shoes were scuffed, muddy from the damp streets outside, and her hair was pulled back loosely, no makeup to soften the plainness of her features. Emilia moved cautiously, not wanting to draw attention, but the stark contrast between her modest appearance and the surrounding luxury was impossible to ignore. A murmur rippled through the crowd as she passed, furtive glances edged with disdain, whispered comments floating just beyond her earshot. A tall gentleman in a crisp black suit looked her up and down with thinly veiled judgment, exchanging a pointed look with his companion. Emilia caught the corner of a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a silent dismissal. At the entrance to the main hall, a doorman in a sharply pressed uniform stopped her. His eyes narrowed as he took in her muddy shoes and plain bag, his posture stiffening into suspicion. Nearby, a woman in a designer dress nudged her date with a smirk and said loud enough for Emilia to hear, "Look, probably one of the cleaning crew got lost on her way to work." A man chuckled as they gestured toward Emilia's simple outfit. Emilia's throat tightened. She drew a steadying breath, determined not to let the chill of exclusion undo her resolve. She folded her hands and stepped forward into the glittering room, fragile but unbowed. The doorman stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His eyes narrowed, fixing Emilia with a scrutiny that felt heavy and cold. "Can I help you? Are you lost?" His voice held an edge, smooth but condescending, carrying the kind of authority that demanded unquestioned compliance. Emilia straightened her spine, managing to keep her voice steady despite the quickening of her pulse. "No, I'm not lost," she said softly. "I was invited to the gala tonight. I'm just waiting to meet a friend." Her hands gripped the handles of her modest bag a little tighter, but she refused to look away. The doorman's gaze flicked disapprovingly downward to her muddy shoes before returning to her face. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "This is an invitation-only event," he said, his tone now sharper. "And your appearance suggests otherwise." His eyes scanned her from head to toe, each glance a silent judgment: the thrift store dress, the unpolished shoes, the simple bag. "Are you sure you belong here?" Emilia's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Yes, I belong here." Her voice was quiet but firm, and she shifted her weight, willing herself not to shrink away under the scrutiny. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Two women whispering close by exchanged amused glances, a soft, cruel laugh escaping one. "She must be staff," one said, loud enough to be heard by more than her companion. "No VIP wears shoes like those." Her words were sharp, coated with disdain. Several guests began pulling out their phones, the glow of screens illuminating small smiles or smirks on their faces as they started recording. The whispers grew louder, filled with cruel glee. "What is she even doing here? Did they let the help in by mistake?" Emilia kept her gaze fixed ahead, but the heat in her cheeks bloomed. Her chest tightened with a wave of humiliation that spread through her limbs, freezing her in place. The doorman shook his head and waved briskly toward the hallway behind him. "You'll have to wait outside with the other staff. This event is not for uninvited guests." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to speak, to object, but the eyes of the crowd were upon her, expectant, hungry for a reaction. She swallowed, barely managing to keep the tears from spilling. The swirling noises of laughter, whispers, and shutter clicks felt like a crushing tide. Around her, the glittering guests resumed their conversations, some exchanging looks of superiority and amusement, others barely masking their contempt. Not one person made a move to intervene or lend a hand. The silence from the crowd was deafening in its indifference. With a slow, deliberate breath, Amelia looked around. Faces grazing her with curious or mocking glances, but no ally emerged. Her fingers curled tighter on her bag, nails pressing into her palm, the outsider inside the hall trapped by whispers and sneers. As she turned, reluctant but forced, the doorman's gaze stabbed into her back, triumphant in his protective stance over the marble threshold. Amelia stepped away quietly, her footsteps light but heavy with the weight of exclusion. Her face was calm, but her mind churned with a storm of embarrassment and disbelief. In the corridor, the fluorescent lights were stark and cold against her skin. The muffled music drifted through the walls, reaching her ears like a cruel reminder of the party continuing just beyond reach. She pressed her back against the polished wall, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to collect herself. A man passed by, looking down at her feet and then up with a sneer, shaking his head. "Should have stayed home if you can't clean up," he muttered without stopping. Amelia's breath caught, but she swallowed the urge to respond. She lifted her chin, her expression hardening. Pride flared quietly beneath the humiliation, unbroken and stubborn. Minutes ticked by. The steady hum of celebration remained on the other side of the doors, music, laughter, the delicate clinking of champagne glasses. The event went on, indifferent to the small figure huddled just outside. She glanced one last time at the marble foyer through the glass panels. Silhouettes moved gracefully in tailored suits and shimmering gowns, engaged in lively conversation. Her place was nowhere among them, at least not like this. Yet somewhere deep inside, a pulse of quiet resolve began to flicker. She would not let their judgment define her worth, not tonight, not ever. Behind the polished brass doors, the doorman straightened his uniform, smoothing the crease on his sleeve with a self-satisfied air. In his mind, he was the guardian of the embassy's prestige, the unwritten line between exclusivity and intrusion. His job, as he saw it, was to preserve the sanctity of the gala, the kind of event where only the best dressed, the most refined, and the most influential were welcome. He replayed the moment in his head, convinced he'd handled the situation with the professionalism and firmness the event required. "We can't have imposters," he muttered to himself, the word tasting bitter. "This is a place for dignitaries and high society, not anyone who waddles in with muddy shoes and thrift shop dresses pretending to be something they're not." He glanced back toward the spot where Amelia had been standing moments ago, now empty. The crowd around him resumed its chatter and laughter, the previous tension dissolving as if nothing had happened. A few guests exchanged glances and chuckled quietly, and the doorman allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. He thought himself a protector of not only the event's reputation but also the invisible social order that held this rarefied world together. Meanwhile, just a few steps away, Amelia sat quietly on a cold bench in the shadowed corridor. Her mind swirled with the encounter's sharp edges. She clutched her simple bag on her lap and stared down at her hands, tightening her jaw against a wave of raw emotion. It was a strange mix, hurt, shame, and a simmering anger that she carefully tucked beneath a veneer of calm. She took deep breaths, counting to 10 in her head, willing herself not to cry or lash out. Her heart ached not just because of the humiliation but because of the cruel spectacle she had become, a subject of mockery in a room she belonged to, in her own right. Not as a lost or unworthy outsider, but as herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft steps of someone approaching. She looked up, startled slightly, as a sharply dressed young assistant neared, carrying a large bouquet of white lilies with a delicate card attached. "Excuse me," the assistant said kindly, glancing around before locking eyes with her. "Miss Clark? These just arrived for you." His voice held respect, an unmistakable contrast to earlier judgment. Amelia took the bouquet, her fingers brushing the delicate petals, and unfolded the card. Her brow lifted slightly as she read the elegant handwriting, a note from the event organizer expressing apologies for the earlier misunderstanding and acknowledging her important role in the evening's program. The assistant smiled gently. "The ambassador asked that I find you. He's expecting you in the main hall." His words rippled through the corridor like a sudden breeze, shifting the atmosphere. Word began to spread quickly. Whispers floated in from nearby rooms, a sudden ripple of curiosity overtaking the previous amusement. Guests who had been laughing about the muddy shoes woman now paused, exchanging tentative glances as news of Amelia's identity drifted through the marble halls. Then the ambassador appeared. A tall, imposing man in a gleaming diplomatic uniform strode confidently toward Amelia, his expression warm and welcoming. The immediate hush that fell over the crowd as he entered was palpable. Conversations halted and heads turned. Stopping in front of Amelia, he smiled and extended his hand. Without hesitation, he pulled her into an embrace, the kind of official welcome that radiated recognition and honor. The warmth of the hug diffused any lingering coldness from earlier, leaving Amelia suspended between embarrassment and relief. "That's Miss Amelia Clark," he announced loudly, his voice echoing through the grand room like a bell. "Our keynote speaker. An internationally acclaimed environmental activist and the driving force behind several global initiatives. It is my honor to welcome her here tonight." The room shifted instantly. The guests' faces, previously painted with amusement or scorn, transformed into expressions of disbelief and surprise. Phones appeared once more, but this time to record her prominence rather than mockery. The doorman, standing off to the side, felt his confident facade crumble. His eyes widened, his mouth tightening into a thin line as he stared at Amelia, the realization settling heavily on his shoulders. A bitter taste rose in his mouth as he retreated to the background, swallowed by sudden shame. The energy in the room was electric now, the murmur of whispers rising as people tilted their heads, seeking confirmation, astonished by the unexpected truth. Those who had jeered before looked away quickly, some exchanging hurried apologies, others avoiding Amelia's direct gaze. Amelia, however, remained composed. She stepped forward into the warm glow of attention, her posture elegant and unpretentious. She did not gloat or dwell on the humiliation she'd suffered. Instead, with a quiet, steady voice, she expressed her gratitude for the introduction. "I am honored to be here," she said, her eyes scanning the room with calm clarity. "The clothes I wear tonight are not about fashion or status. They are a reflection of the work I do, working alongside communities in some of the most vulnerable areas affected by climate change. My appearance speaks to the journey I've taken and the hands-on commitment I hold dear." Her words settled over the crowd like a soft but firm declaration. She spoke of her recent travels to remote regions where resources were scarce, where survival meant hard labor and muddy roads not unlike the ones that had left their marks on her shoes that evening. She contrasted these realities with the polished elegance of the gala, a stark reminder of how worlds often apart could come together in shared efforts for change. The guests listened, some nodding thoughtfully, others quietly reconsidering their earlier judgments. The room's atmosphere shifted from one of elitism to introspection as Amelia's values and grace wove a powerful counterpoint to the snobbery they had exhibited. The ambassador looked on, pride and respect evident in his eyes. Amelia was no longer a figure to be dismissed but a symbol of purpose and resilience. As she stood there, poised yet humble, it became clear that the evening had taken an unexpected turn, one that would ripple beyond the glittering walls of the embassy. The ambassador's voice carried firmly through the crowd, commanding attention as he raised a hand to pause conversations rippling throughout the grand ballroom. Every head turned toward Amelia, who now stood with a quiet dignity, the spotlight shifting abruptly onto her from the glittering chandeliers overhead. The polished brass fixtures gleamed as if reflecting the sudden change in the evening's mood, the atmosphere charged with a potent mixture of surprise and awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," the ambassador began, "this evening we honor a remarkable individual whose dedication transcends borders and social status alike. Emilia Clarke is not just a guest, she is our keynote speaker, a driving force behind a global environmental initiative that addresses some of the world's most pressing challenges." The words echoed, carrying weight in the hushed room. A collective intake of breath circled among the guests. Faces that had moments ago flashed amusement, pity, and condescension were now wiped clean with disbelief, then quickly hardened into respect. Emilia's plain attire, a simple, thrift store dress and scuffed shoes, was suddenly recontextualized. No longer a mark of outsider status or social misfit, her clothes became a symbol of her authenticity, a testament to her unyielding commitment to the causes she championed. The doorman, immobilized near the entrance, stared dumbfounded. His lips parted slightly in surprise, his eyes flickering nervously at the crowd now looking in his direction. The confident composure he had worn like armor earlier had evaporated, replaced by a palpable shame. He pressed his back against the wall as murmurs swelled louder, fingers pointing discreetly but unmistakably in his direction. Guests who moments earlier had laughed at Emilia's expense now scrambled to rectify their behavior. A woman who had whispered the harshest insults glanced down at her shoes, then quickly averted her gaze when their owner met her eyes. A group of men hurried over, their voices low but sincere, offering halting apologies as they extended respectful nods. Despite the turmoil in the room, Emilia did not gloat or seize the moment for personal triumph. Instead, she radiated calm and grace, acknowledging the shift in perception without bitterness. Clearing her throat softly, she addressed the crowd with measured poise. "Thank you for your warm welcome," Emilia began. "Tonight, I stand before you not as a symbol of glamour or ease, but as someone who lives and breathes the realities of the vulnerable communities I work with every day." Her voice was steady, unwavering, drawing the attention of every guest. "The simple dress I chose to wear tonight is a deliberate statement, a reflection of my belief that the fight for our planet does not come adorned in finery but in boots and durable cloth, worn from travel to remote and difficult places." She paused, letting the words sink in. There is beauty in humility and strength in simplicity. Too often in social gatherings like these, appearances can cloud the truth of experience. I come here tonight with stories of resilience, of perseverance in the face of adversity, born not in comfort but in hardship. A stirred silence followed, punctuated only by the faint clink of glassware. Emilia's narrative reframed the gala's opulence, calling on the audience to reconsider their own values beneath the shimmering surface. Her presence was a quiet rebellion against the shallow judgments that had greeted her earlier. It was a living example of integrity and conviction breaking through the polished veneer of high society's customs. The ambassador stepped forward beside her, his voice once again steady and resolute. "Emilia Clarke represents the essence of courage and commitment. Through her tireless advocacy, she has brought meaningful change to communities straining under the weight of environmental crises. We are proud to have her here this evening." As the applause began to swell, Emilia's gaze traveled across the room, meeting eyes that now looked at her with newfound respect and openness. The guests' whispered exchanges gave way to genuine conversation, questions about her work replacing the idle gossip. The transformation was tangible, a shift from exclusion to acceptance, from superficial judgments to heartfelt appreciation. And amidst it all, Emilia held herself with quiet strength, a measured smile touching her lips but never overpowering the sense of purpose that defined her. She had endured the sting of ridicule only moments before and emerged unbowed, her values shining brighter than any gown or jewel in the room. Her story, her presence, was far more compelling than appearances alone could ever reveal. The ambassador's firm voice cut through the applause and chatter, directing attention back toward the entrance. He stepped toward the doorman, whose earlier confidence had unraveled completely beneath the weight of the evening's revelations. The man stood frozen momentarily, caught between embarrassment and disbelief. "This behavior will not be tolerated," the ambassador declared with clear authority, voice carrying effortlessly across the grand ballroom. "Our gala celebrates inclusion and respect, not exclusion based on appearances. I expect all staff to embody the values we uphold." His gaze locked onto the doorman, an unspoken reprimand blazing behind the calm expression. The doorman's shoulders sagged, color rushing to his cheeks as guests' eyes turned toward him, their disbelief transforming into cold judgment. Whispers spread rapidly, about his arrogance, his short-sightedness, his inability to see beyond surface impressions. A few guests approached the ambassador quietly after his statement, nodding in agreement, offering murmured encouragement for further corrective measures. The weight of collective disapproval shifted decisively onto the doorman's shoulders. Within hours, word of the incident spread beyond the embassy's ornate walls. Social media buzzed with videos from the event, capturing not only the initial confrontation but the ambassador's public defense of Amelia and the shifting tide of opinion that followed. The doorman's name and image surfaced in comments and calls for accountability, his actions becoming a cautionary example of elitism turned viral. The embassy swiftly announced the reassignment of the doorman, coupled with a planned program of customer service and sensitivity training aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment at all future events. The message was clear: discrimination and condescension had no place within their prestigious institution. Days later, Amelia found herself crossing paths with the doorman outside an adjacent entrance, their encounter unplanned but nonetheless inevitable. The man's eyes flickered with discomfort, his posture awkward and uncertain. "Miss Clark," he began haltingly, voice lower than before. I want to apologize for my actions. I was wrong to judge you." His words came with a sincerity that surprised her, tinged with humility. Amelia regarded him quietly for a moment, the hurt still faintly visible in her gaze, yet tempered by the grace she carried throughout the ordeal. She offered a small, understanding smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "Acknowledging that is a good step." There was no grand forgiveness, no dramatic reconciliation, just a simple human exchange acknowledging mistakes and growth. Later, during the closing moments of the gala, Amelia walked steadily through the glittering hall once more. This time, instead of wary glances or cruel whispers, the guests stepped aside with respect, their eyes following her with quiet admiration and newfound understanding. The atmosphere had shifted irreversibly, changed by her presence and the dignity she maintained against adversity. The night, which had threatened to swallow her in judgment, became a testament to resilience and the power of grace. Underneath the sparkling chandeliers and beyond the polished marbles, something deeper had been altered, a subtle but profound transformation in attitudes, a reminder that worth often lies far beyond the surface. Amelia moved onward, a quiet figure of strength, leaving behind a room forever touched by the authenticity she embodied.